Dr. David Rakel, thank you for joining us to talk more about how meaningful connections help patients as well as their doctors.
Thanks, Megan. Good to be here.
You open your book with a story of a patient you had who was facing a whole array of complex health issues. Why was this a catalyst for you to change how you were relating to patients?
Well, we come out of training thinking that we know how to do this job. And we get a lot of training in slapping a treatment on a symptom. And when you get into practice, your patients help you realize you don't know a whole lot. And you have to go into their life, their context. And this story was a great example of that. Once you go into the story behind the symptom, some authentic truth comes out. And it helps us realize that just putting a pill to every ill isn't always the most efficient path. It might be for some simple things, but when you have complexity in multiple disease states, you have to go a little bit deeper into the essence of that person's life, which is unique for every human being, to really understand how we can get in there and facilitate self-healing mechanisms so we don't need as many things.
Because she was sort of like this cascade of things upon things, and you're prescribing more things. And
I was.
Until you finally sort of got to a root of some of the things, right?
That's right. We were prescribing things for things we prescribed, right? And then, when that happens, you're prescribing stuff to take care of the side effects of other things you prescribed. It wasn't until she came out and disclosed some suffering, some trauma in her life that we then turned towards and dealt with and went into, that her body said, okay, now I can heal. And that doesn't get a lot of science because it's not concrete. It's gray, it's complex, it's not as easy to define. But there lies the challenge. How do we allow time and space for us to do that in healthcare delivery, so we're not just at an inch deep and a mile wide in healthcare delivery? There are times where we have to go a mile deep, and that complexity of all these different conditions is an opportunity.
You make the distinction that connecting is important, not just communicating, but connecting. Why is that distinction important?
It's another hard thing that's hard to define. But you know it when you feel trust in another human being. You feel cared for by another human being. You feel like you're their only priority in that moment. You feel that, and that gives you permission to go a little bit deeper into what's really going on. And if we don't sit with that compassion, that trust with another human being, often we just deal with the superficial stuff. And that often leads to us doing more things or doing more tests, which is very expensive and not very productive in helping us get to a better healthy outcome. It helps us manage disease, which is fine, but when we talk more about value-based care of how do we obtain healthier communities, that requires a different way, a different process of care.
What are the risks to patients when there's a lack of this authentic connection that you write about?
Now, not everybody needs this. If you come in with a earache, right? Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. But there are some people that we really do need this, and those are the ones that generally have the highest medical bills, or the longest problem list, or the most suffering, or the most lonely. Those are some things that, how do we take the most appropriate professional to address the health needs of that human being? And most chronic health conditions that we see now are preventable. They're related to human behavior. But we have a system where we just wait for the body to break and then we try and manage it with our technology, which is great. Thank God for that technology, the pharmaceuticals. But if that's all we give focus to, the disease, we're just going to wait for disease to occur and then try and fix it, which is very expensive and very harmful, particularly with polypharmacy. 36% of Americans are on 5 drugs or more. Man. And we have the most expensive, most harmful health system in the world. And so that should tell us something, that maybe we need to restructure it. Maybe we need to train differently. Maybe we need to practice differently. Maybe we need to create opportunities to spend 5 minutes with the earache and maybe a little bit longer with the depression and heart disease and low back pain.
Doctors are increasingly facing problems of burnout, professional burnout. So how can making these kinds of connections help them as well?
Yeah, we're having this wonderful debate at UNM in our health system about the balance between how do we do this for ourselves and how do we create a healthier environment so it's not all about doing yoga, right? That we create a healthier environment for us to work in. And we see that about 52% of physicians have at least one symptom of burnout. And I would argue that it is mainly related to us not connecting, because it's that connection, that human connection, that rewards us the most. Having time to go a little bit deeper and really looking towards that authentic reason for a symptom is exciting and empowering. But if we're doing this
on the
computer, we're looking at an inanimate object and spending most of our time, and the research shows we spend twice as much time looking at computers than we do patients. We are creating a barrier between what feeds us, and it's what most of us went into this work for, was to touch human beings. And our health system has gotten into the way of that, and that's okay. We're figuring that out, but we're trying to do something about it. And at UNM, we're doing some amazing things to try and address that.
Talk a little bit, what are you guys doing? You're in front of a computer a lot. We've got electronic health records, so.
Yeah. There's a number of
you
things.
You can't ditch the computers.
No. But the computer in the past has asked for us to code better to extract money, which has really been a barrier towards this, right, to people. And with evolution of electronic health records, it's going to be a better tool, more efficient tool to help us do more of this. So we're not doing more of this.
Yeah.
And that's just a part of the evolution of the technology. So that's going to happen. But what are we doing at UNM? We're the only medical school in the country that requires the Healer's Art elective. Well, it's not an elective here, but it is in every other school. And that's just an opportunity for students to explore health for themselves, because we're our own first patient. We are our first patient. And it's hard to do this for others until we explore this for ourselves. So we feel that's very important, and we're investing in that. The other thing I love about our medical schools, we interview everybody. And we really make a conscious effort to bring in a diverse medical school enrollment that represents each of our communities here in New Mexico. And sometimes that's hard because not everybody has the same access to a math course that helps them do well on a standardized test, or it's from a culture that's different from them. So our medical school does really good at addressing those needs and really helping those students be successful, because generally what determines a good doctor is not how well they do on tests. And computers are going to do memorization much better for us in the future. And a lot of what we talk about in this book is what we're going to need most from physicians is this. It's that human connection, because computers don't do that well. A computer can diagnose your urinary tract infection and prescribe you just fine, but they can't do complexity as well. They can't recognize emotion as well. They can't take a lot of unrelated bits of information and come to a logical conclusion. Only humans can do that. So I think in the future, physicians are going to be doing more emotional intelligence and listening to the story and doing procedures that robots can't do, but it's going to look completely different in the future.
You cite a number of studies that show that when there is this compassionate connection to patients, it actually increases the efficacy of drugs and promotes better health outcomes. Give us some examples of this.
Sure. I'll give you one. We did some research in this, but I'm going to give you a different one because it's a little bit shorter. They did a study in Italy of people after surgery, and there was two arms. One arm was a kind nurse who came in, touched the patient, and said, "I'm going to give you something for your pain. It's going to help you feel better." And they sat on the bed. They stacked the deck in favor of a compassionate delivery system before they gave the morphine. And then the other group, they gave the morphine behind a curtain by a machine when the patient didn't even know they were receiving the morphine. Same drug, same dose, different process of delivery. And when they looked at the outcomes of pain and anxiety, they were significantly better when it was given by a kind nurse versus the machine. And they then quantitated how much better that was in regards to milligrams of morphine. And we usually start with 1 to 2 milligrams of morphine. This equaled 8 milligrams of morphine is the process of how something is delivered. So what we're learning through this science is that the medication has an effect, right? Mm-hmm. But it's the process or ceremony of how that is delivered that has by far the greater effect.
I know when you were at University of Wisconsin, and this is a longer story, but the essence of it is you were looking at how compassionate interactions versus kind of standard clinical interactions would affect people who have colds.
Yeah.
And you have a great story about you guys were randomized, so you're about to go into a patient, you pull out your card, it's standard, which means you're clinical cold, sort of, non-connecting, versus enhanced. Mm-hmm. You were going to go see this 12-year-old girl. So you pull out your card and you get standard. So you have to be like Dr. House or whatever.
Right. Yeah, it was like good cop, bad cop.
What was that like for you?
It was hard because what feeds us, we'd love to pull the card and say enhanced, which was good cop. And then we'd stack the deck in favor of, I would touch, I would laugh with them, I would name the virus, rhinovirus, we'd give them a sense of control, we would connect with them. We actually took acting lessons to connect with that human being, and we would be compassionate and empathetic. And that was fun, it was energizing. But when we pulled the standard card, the bad cop, we had to actually disconnect. We couldn't connect with that other human being, and it felt bad. Jump to the results of the study, that compassionate connection, that enhanced connection, good cop, reduced the duration of the common cold by over a day.
Wow.
For the most common infectious disease on this planet. But the story that you refer to, we had a video camera in the room so we could see all the patients before we go in. And the inclusion criteria, you had to be 12 years old. So this was a 12-year-old African-American girl in her Sunday best. And I looked at the monitor, and she was like a 12-year-old angel. She just was the most beautiful thing. And she was sitting there, little ruddy nose. And I went up to pick the card of standard or enhanced, and I was saying, please be enhanced, please be enhanced.
Because you wanted to connect.
I wanted to connect. That's what's fun. It's what's enjoyable. And it was standard, right? I had to be a bad cop to this 12-year-old girl. So I went in, I followed the protocol, I was a good scientist, and she could feel I needed something because I wasn't connecting. I was kind of, depressed. I couldn't connect with this 12-year-old. And at the very end, we always end, and I was trying to impede this pull because she knew I needed something more than she did. And she was trying to reach out and connect to me. And at the end, we always asked, is there anything else I can help you with? So I kind of did this. Is there anything else you need? And she said, do you have a family? And I could still feel it right here. And I said, I was a good scientist. I've got a wife and 3 kids. Any other questions? And then I left the room. And I did my science, but I felt terrible. And I think that's why we're seeing so much burnout in primary care, is that I felt terrible for about a week.
Multiply that times 100 or 1,000.
Yeah, exactly. And it just drains you when we create a system that prevents human connection.
Yeah. We all have implicit biases. You write about biases in medicine. How do those play out in a way that discourages empathy or these kinds of connections?
Well, we all think everybody needs what we know, right? And we're really good at that in medicine.
Well, doctors are smart.
Yeah, exactly. And that's part of the problem. Sometimes we just say, okay, I know what that rash is, you take this cream, fine. But a lot of times our unconscious bias, the minute we sit with someone, we start judging them. And that
even if you don't know you're doing it?
Even if you don't know you're doing it, which is humans, that's what we do. But the process is we have to first sit and be mindful with someone, and that's defined as being in a present moment on purpose without judgment. That's the hard part, without judgment. So you sit with someone, and then you just be with them with the beginner's mind, the child's eye. You see them for what they truly are. You take your expertise, set it aside, because there'll be a chance where you can put that expertise back on. But initially, you have to just be with them. And in order to do that, you have to explore your unconscious, your implicit bias. Mm-hmm. And we all have them. But the first step, and this is something we're trying to teach to our learners, is, hey, how have you been conditioned? How have you learned to see the world? Mm-hmm. Be careful that you don't project those beliefs too early or inappropriately onto other human beings before you've heard their story.
You write that patients don't remember what you tell them as much as how you made them feel.
Yeah.
And so if doctors have to deliver bad news, even a fatal diagnosis, how does a doctor make that better through how they communicate it?
Well, it's true, right? I mean, I think back of what you remember in your childhood. It's usually some emotional event. It's not what you remembered in math class, generally, unless you really connected with the teacher. So we all have limbic systems. The limbic system is our emotional part of our brain. And that part is what really connects to another human being. And if you're going to give someone bad news, they'll remember how you gave it rather than what you said. You cannot treat suffering with a bunch of facts. It never works. All the patient will hear is blah, blah, blah. But if you're with them, you touch them, you use your nonverbal communication, you show you care, and you do that in a compassionate way, you can go through some very difficult times and come out of that room actually okay.
You talk about the need to turn toward suffering in your book.
Yeah.
That sounds like a hard sell.
It is. Would you rather get a massage or turn toward suffering, right? But if we're going to do this healing thing well, health and healing, to be whole, at some point we have to turn towards what's really going on. And in all of the human race, we've been hurt, we've been traumatized. There's often a reason for a symptom or to suffer. And if we never turn towards that, we're just going to give you more pills, right? We're going to try and use more passive external things to treat your suffering. But the only way suffering can be treated is to go within and facilitate an active, not a passive, but an active process that comes from within that we give permission to through two people. And it's hard to do that alone.
Can you teach empathy?
I believe so. I really believe so. In Europe, they have acting coaches that come in and try and encourage the medical students to act empathetic, which I don't like because it's not authentic, right? But I really think you can. And there is a difference between empathy and compassion, and I think that's a really important thing. Is there's empathy distress or empathy fatigue, because empathy sees us as two different people. There's Megan and Dave. And I feel your suffering, and then I got to do something about it. That's empathy. Sympathy is I feel your suffering, we cry together, and then I go home. There's no action. So that action actually puts a lot of weight on my shoulders. That, okay, I felt your pain, now I got to do something about it. If I don't have time to do something about it, I leave the room, I carry that pain with me. Compassion sees two people suffering together. And the way I like to look at that is if I help you, I help myself, because we're one unit. All living things on this planet are interconnected. And there's science behind that. And if I take that into this encounter, that you and I are part of the same thing, and I help you, I help myself, that actually empowers. And if you look at the research, when we do empathy training versus compassion training, mood goes up, depression goes down with compassion, but not empathy.
Interesting. We have a lot of challenges in New Mexico with historical trauma and also addiction. How does the approach you're advocating create the potential for better outcomes for people suffering from these issues?
Yeah, one of the things we're hoping to do more and more is bring the patient's goals, what gives their life meaning and purpose, into the clinical encounter, into electronic health records. So if you open up your electronic health record and you see your problem list, everything that's wrong with you, it kind of makes you feel broken, or you know, it doesn't make you feel good when you see all the things that are wrong with you. So we're trying to shift from a pathogenic process to suffer, pathos to suffer, the genesis of suffering, to a salutogenic process, salute health, genesis to create health. And in order to do that, I can look upon the same person but in a different way. Instead of seeing you as what diseases do you have, I can look at you and say, okay, what does Megan need to be healthy? How do we find out what matters to you instead of what's the matter with you? And so we're trying to incorporate your health goals. Why do you want to be healthy? What do you want your health for? And then we pull meaning into the conversation, because that's what influences behavior the most. And behavior is the main determinant of healthy outcomes. Health is much more about what you do than what you take, by far.
So what's our role as patients in making sure we have these connections and have better health outcomes?
It's tough. I mean, we've trained each other. A patient comes, oh, you're the doctor, you tell me. You've got the expertise.
Right.
So we not only have to retrain clinicians, we have to also train individuals to maybe ask different questions. And when we started to ask this question, this is how I would explain it to my patients. Hey, I'm going to click on all these boxes on this computer, and we're trying something new. I want to know what you want your health for. I got all this expertise, we have all these professionals here, but I want to know why you want to be healthy. And since we started to ask that question, I've had the deepest, most meaningful conversations with people. It's been the most rewarding thing in the 25 years of practice when we go right to meaning with that simple question. But it doesn't work if I ask it like this, looking at the computer. What gives your life meaning? It just doesn't work. So that process of how we do that makes all the difference, and that's what this book talks about.
Well, Dr. David Rakel, thank you so much for coming and talking with us.
Thank you for having me, Megan.